morning and welcome to Rising. We have just a fantastic show for you today. I'm excited to get right to it. Joined, of course, by Lindsey Granger. Nice to see you.
Yeah, you had your caffeine chocolate bar this morning, and I didn't, and so I feel like I gotta make sure.
Was I too sleepy yesterday?
Yeah, honestly, and the
People
audience
were saying
can tell
I was
me
sleeping.
you were giving me like a solid.
I was letting you talk for change.
They were like 9 minutes ago. I'm like, wow, Robby's just relaxed about all topics today. I couldn't believe it. But we did good, I think. The audience should be good. Tell me what's on your radar.
All right, let's get to it. Who is the new leader of the Democratic Party? Well, that's a question we've been asking quite frequently on Rising because it's clear the Democratic Party's base is really unhappy with leadership. It's also clear that President Trump and the Republicans feel like they face very little meaningful opposition right now and can just do whatever they want. I don't know if the subject of this radar is going to be the leader of the Democratic Party, but she is certainly an up-and-coming person of notability, a personality of notability. But is she really ready for prime time? I'm talking, of course, about Representative Jasmine Crockett of Texas, a fiery progressive who has attracted significant media attention in the last, say, 6 months. It is also the subject of a new profile in Atlantic magazine. The Atlantic's Elaine Godfrey interviewed the Congresswoman and several of her colleagues. Now, what's drawn the profile to my attention, and as was the conversation about it on social media, it seems Crockett apparently doesn't quite understand how journalism works, because in the profile, there's this following passage. I'm quoting from it. Crockett said that people are free to disagree with her communication style, but that she was elected to speak up for the people that I represent. As for her colleagues, 4 days before this story was published, Crockett called me to express frustration that I had reached out to so many House members without telling her first. She told me, shutting down the profile and revoking all permissions. That's funny because you can't do that. Sorry, this is like one of the most basic rules of dealing with journalists. Sorry. Once you've spoken to them on the record, you don't own the story anymore. They do. You can't stop them from covering you because you don't like that they reached out to other people. You have to decline to talk to them in the first place or set the terms in advance. As NBC's Sahil Kapoor put it, this is not how any of this works, but don't, of course, try to tell Jasmine Crockett any of that. She is bursting with self-confidence, according to this profile. In fact, she seems pretty unhappy. She was passed over for a top leadership position, chair of the House Oversight Committee. The profile recounts her personal feelings of betrayal that her own caucus, the Congressional Black Caucus, backed a different person. You see, Crockett believes she's the most qualified person for the job because, and I quote, there's one clear person in the race that has the largest social media following. Generating attention, positive and also negative, is something she's quite good at, obviously. Is it really the case, however, that being provocative, spicy, contrarian, unfiltered, attention-seeking, and let's be honest, fairly bombastic and occasionally offensive, is that the best set of attributes for Democratic leadership? Who knows? Maybe it is. Certainly the Democratic base wants leaders to fight the Republicans, if only in virtue-signaling sort of ways that have nothing to do with actual power and policy. At least Crockett was willing to do this.
If someone on this committee then starts talking about somebody's bleach blonde, bad-built butch body, that would not be engaging in personalities, correct?
A what now?
Chairman, I make a motion to strike those words.
I don't think that's
Hold on.
I'm trying to find clarification on what qualifies.
Chairman, motion to strike those words.
I had no idea what you just said.
We're not gonna do this. Look, you guys earlier literally just said
You just voted to do it.
Y'all did it first, so you don't want to talk about it.
Voted to do it.
Order.
I'm trying to get clarification.
Look at calm down.
No, because this is what
y'all
y'all
do.
So I'm trying to get
Miss
clarification.
Crockett, you're not recognized. Miss Crockett.
I can't hear you with your yelling.
Vote for Democrats. They want to turn Congress into Real Housewives or some MTV reality show. I guess that's the pitch. But in an era in which excessive clout chasing has infected both parties, and in which the leaders of both political factions have more interest in making memes and manufacturing media moments than they do in actual legislation, perhaps Jasmine Crockett is the leader the Democrats deserve. Just as Trump is the id of the right, she might be the id of the left.
I really cannot believe that you are saying the decorum that is not shown by Jasmine Crockett is something that disturbs you when you specifically rally for President Trump and that poor decorum that he has as the standard of the party, and also showed that clip and didn't remind folks that Marjorie Taylor Greene started with Jasmine Crockett with poor behavior, not conducive to a congressional seat behavior, making fun of her eyelashes like a child. So this is very much the attitude of the right. And so for people on the left to be excited that somebody else is meeting them and not going higher, like Michelle Obama, going into the ground where a lot of people were at and are celebrated on the right, this should be something that can also be celebrated on the left. It doesn't mean she's the only person in the party. You're hearing conversations about Mamdani. You're hearing conversations about her. You still have people like AOC. You still have Bernie Sanders. You still have Pete Buttigieg, who's very vocal. So this Democratic Party can be a lot of things.
Bernie and AOC in that Atlantic profile.
And she rightfully can, but that's the point. The Democrats should not be figuring this out this late in the game is my biggest criticism. But Jasmine Crockett is obviously somebody who can speak to all the things that are relevant for the Democratic Party. She's young, she's outspoken, she's meeting Trump exactly where he's at, and she also is a trained lawyer. She's smart. She's worked in state politics in Texas. She represents the diversity of Texas that sometimes is overlooked. She's effective. This is not her first job. It's not like she's just some kid that was popular on social media that doesn't deserve an opportunity like this. She's more than qualified for these positions.
I think if Marjorie Taylor Greene said that she should be the leader or one of the leaders of the Republican congressional delegation because she is the best known personality, provocative personality on social media, I bet major mainstream media, liberal Democratic people would criticize her for that. That is the same argument Jasmine Crockett is making. She says, I deserve this job, not because I'm so qualified, not because I'm an attorney, not because of whatever my sterling legal background, but because I have more clout. That is the Democratic Party, I think, embracing and then some, whatever the Trump phenomenon. It's not really clout, it's because it's a genuine affection from millions and millions of people.
There are more than 500 people in Congress that are fighting for airtime, whether it's on podcasts because they understand that that's the way to connect with young people, whether it's on cable news because they understand that's the way to connect with older people. There are people clamoring for time. Jasmine Crockett can say something, put a post out on X, go on any outlet because they're asking her multiple times as opposed to her trying to ask them and get a message out. That's effective communication, especially in a new media age that you argue is more prevalent than old media. So Jasmine Crockett is the exact person that can reach those young voters because you talked about how they were isolated. She is doing exactly what you want. You are arguing both sides of this issue, and I don't like you, Robin, because you love new media. You love people that, no, you think that social media should. I do. I think she's a great role model. I think this is someone who's legally trained, culturally adept. She has media savvy. She's funny. She's smart. What do you mean? Yes, I do think that she's a great role model.
I don't think her behavior in the clip I played is
Trump a role model
type stuff.
Is Trump a role model?
I've never said that he is.
Is he? I'm asking you.
No, I don't think his
He is the president of the United
behavior
States.
Is the way I would want people to model their own behavior, but that his policies are superior to the policies of Joe Biden.
But the behavior that Trump exhibits is modeled by the entire MAGA base.
But this is a total misnomer because I frequently criticize Trump's behavior and the things he says about the media and his attacks on the media and how he treats other people is something I criticize constantly. So you're not really catching me in some hypocrisy here. I'm not like, rah, Trump, I love everything about him and everything he does. I tend to like his policies, particularly his foreign policy, better than the alternatives. But I think he would be a more effective president. I'd like him even more if he could restrain himself in some of the things he says, in some of the performances he does. But here's Democrats saying, no, let's do a performance like that, and then also have bad policies. That's like the worst of all worlds to me. Well,
I also think you need to have a little bit of a moral compass, which is where I lead from, which is what I always tell you about President Trump. And so if we're going to let that go for President Trump, then I'm going to be equally nuanced in the conversation and let that go for Democrats also. I would prefer if nobody was doing this. I would prefer if we could have decorum back in our institutions like we used to.
We'll see if that makes an effective political message for the Democrats. Let decorum go and just let our freak flag fly, baby.
It works for Republicans, so.
I don't know if it'll work for Democrats. Next up, Trump is increasingly growing frustrated with Russian President Vladimir Putin. His latest play to end the war in Ukraine, how the Russians are reacting, is coming up next. Stick around.
We've had discussions, you and I have had discussions. Yeah. We thought we had that settled numerous times. And then President Putin goes out and starts launching rockets into some city like Kiev and kills a lot of people in a nursing home or whatever. You have bodies lying all over the street. I'm disappointed in President Putin. Very disappointed in him. So we're going to have to look, and I'm going to reduce that 50 days that I gave him to a lesser number because I think I already know the answer what's going to happen.
You heard it there. Trump is moving up that 50-day deadline he gave Russian President Vladimir Putin to either reach peace with Ukraine or face economic consequences.
You may remember earlier this month, Trump threatened a 100% secondary tariff aimed at punishing nations that do business with Russia and hurting the Russian economy. The initial 50-day deadline gave the Russians until September 2nd to reach a deal, but Trump clarified Monday afternoon in a sit-down with the UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer that the new deadline could be shortened to early August, just 10 to 12 days.
Russian officials have not taken kindly to Trump's threats, with former Russian President Dmitry Medvedev claiming that the move is a step toward war. He posted this to X. Trump's playing the ultimatum game with Russia, 50 days or 10. He should remember two things. One, Russia isn't Israel or even Iran. Two, each new ultimatum is a threat and a step toward war, not between Russia and Ukraine, but with his own country. Don't go down the Sleepy Joe road. I find that comment from Medvedev there a little bit totally manipulative. Was step closer toward war. Dude, your country is in a war. It's attacking another country. Trump is trying to get peace. He's trying to do this multiple ways. We've tried it. We can do it the easy way or we can do it the hard way. We've tried it the nice way. The nice way is not working, and now Trump's trying it the less nice way. And I think that's fine. I appreciate that Trump came in with a different attitude than Biden, wanted to try to get a peace deal. Russia is being very difficult and non-cooperative, and Trump is frustrated about that. I would again say, as I've said 1,000 times, that we were in a very bad negotiating position because of the way the shape of this war has developed, with Russia winning its conflict against Ukraine. Ukraine is in a very weak military position, and so it doesn't have much bargaining power, and has been somewhat resistant to the idea of making a deal that is so unfavorable to Ukraine. It sounds like they've gotten convinced that they need to do something, and so really the problem's not so much now the Zelensky government, but the Putin government. But the Putin government is a problem, and Trump's trying to deal with it as best we can. We don't want to be in a war with Russia, and I would again say if it's about the U.S. having some kind of direct military conflict, we should try to avoid that at all costs. In fact, we must avoid that. There's no cost we can pay. It's not going to be fine. So there we are. And in terms of the giving weapons and aid, that's still being discussed. The sanctions, I don't know what they're even going to accomplish. We had sanctions on Russia. It didn't slow down the economy very much. Our sanctions regimes don't seem to me to weaken the positions of authoritarian governments at all. Show me the track record. Show me where sanctions got us a kind of favorable outcome. I guess our sanctions were part of the story of Assad being overthrown in Syria, which I don't even know if that was a net positive. We're going to give the ISIS guy a chance, but we'll see how that shapes up. Anyway,
I
ranting.
understand Trump's
What's
position,
your take?
but show me the example where cozying up to a dictator ever worked. And so while the rest of the world was kind of calm and said, yeah, we should go about this in a way that we're supporting Ukraine, and Trump's treatment of Zelensky was a little bit abhorrent and not appropriate, I'm still happy that he's moving in the right direction now for the second time, a direction that he probably should have started his presidency with, because he overestimated what he can get Putin to do. No one thought that he can get Putin no one thought he was that much of a great negotiator to get a dictator to change their ways on something that they've been trying to do for decades and generations. Long before Trump was even in office, this was a goal in Russia's mind, trying to get Crimea back in their territory and everything that's happened so far. So I think, I'm happy as a country that at least we're taking a stance on the world stage against a dictator. And I do think that sanctions and monetary repercussions for Russia do work. I think their oil revenues are shrinking. Their inflation is high. It's going to get uncomfortable to continue to spend money in this war. And also, no matter what anybody says, Russia does not want a war with the U.S. and the U.S. definitely does not want a war with Russia. So these are the last options on the table. And I think even in the most extreme circumstances with dictators that do threaten, nobody is going to get into that situation or wants to get in that situation, because a lot of people will be harmed on both sides. And at the end of the day, the U.S. is a huge superpower. It's not Ukraine. So I think that this just has to be a conversation about how do we settle this. But Vladimir Putin had no incentive before earlier this year to come to the table. He spoke to President Trump 3 times in 2025 and nothing changed. And so he had no incentive to do anything besides kiki with his best friend on the phone and have like a good conversation, but nothing was accomplished. And so now Trump looks like now Trump looks like a fool. I mean, and he looks so foolish that he allowed.
No. This idea that Putin had Putin, by the way, wanted Harris to win. And he wanted Biden to win.
No.
What do you, he said he did.
Yeah, that was like a joke to me.
No, it's not a joke. It's the truth, because he knows those people are more easily manipulated by Ukraine in a way that is going to be good for Russia. What, we're not supposed to take him at his word that those are the people he preferred?
No.
You don't? Okay, I was told we must. I think it's clear his preference was to deal with predictable, tractable Joe Biden and Kamala Harris.
Well, either way, backing Ukraine is not charity. It's a long-term strategy.
Also, you said cozying up to a... What do you mean?
Yeah,
like
because even we had a great conversation. We had a great. We shouldn't be having a great conversation with somebody who is annihilating a country that was so close to being a part of.
Xi Jinping is a dictator. Should we still have to have relations with him, talk to him on the phone, work to de-escalate tensions?
Yeah, but our allies are uncomfortable with the fact that Russia is moving and inching closer to NATO territories, and so therefore we need to work as an ally before it gets to a situation that's uncontrollable on Europe's and most
Cozying
part.
up to a dictator is
having three conversations
rhetoric.
where they're talking on the phone for hours and then coming back to the press and telling them, we had a great conversation. Yeah, I can't believe he did. Like, what can you not believe? Every president before you understood pretty much in recent history what type of leader Putin was, except for President Trump. So that's the confusing part to the American public, who kind of saw this in plain sight and understood why some of the decisions were made to try to protect Ukraine in the way that we were. And so for him to pause funding and get Ukraine in the situation that it's in even further, and not to be able to protect itself and kind of stall Russia and stall out this war to make them continue to expend resources.
Well, okay, that's what we did. That plan, that was the Biden plan, and it didn't do Ukraine any favors. Thousands of people got killed, and now Ukraine. We gave
Trump
our
just said
full
himself,
support.
we did it again, and
we
they
did
bombed right the day after we got on the phone.
Putin.
They bombed.
We did the refusing to cozy up, and where are we? We're in the exact same situation.
Okay, so then
so
Trump
no
tried to get
amount
on the phone
of
with
moral
Russia.
frustration with Putin was going to save Ukrainian lives.
And then Trump got on the phone with Russia, and then within a week of that conversation, drones were all over Ukraine and bombing the city, and people died again. And so nothing happened either way.
I guess I'm the liberal. Can't we give peace a chance? Can't we try? And you're the we no moral compromises with evil. We must fight them everywhere on every that's just, I think it's a very unrealistic attitude for this conflict. There are bad guys running all sorts of nations all over the earth. We can't fight them all. We can't kill them all.
At the very least,
if we just morally condemn them all, we'll be friendless.
And at the very least, we should not incite confusion, because what President Trump did is go back and forth on his strategy now, where he was like, listen,
because he's negotiating.
No, he was condescending Zelensky in public and making it seem like it also was his fault for this war.
So Zelensky is a perfect angel.
No, he's not a perfect angel, but we should not.
Ever.
No, he's definitely not a perfect angel.
Putin, we shouldn't talk to on the phone because he's a bad guy.
We have to leave it there because the segment's ending. But no, there's plenty more to talk about here.
All right. Up next, President Trump is disputing Benjamin Netanyahu's claims of no starvation in Gaza while vowing to set up food centers to deliver aid to the people there. Don't go anywhere.
Mr. President, Prime Minister Netanyahu said there's no starvation in Gaza. Do you agree with that assessment?
I don't know. I mean, based on television, I would say not particularly, because those children look very hungry. But we're giving a lot of money and a lot of food, and other nations are now stepping up.
That was President Trump breaking with Israel Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's assessment that there's, quote, no starvation in Gaza. Trump did acknowledge he'd seen pictures on television of children in Gaza, and they, quote, looked very hungry.
Speaking to the reporters during a meeting with British Prime Minister Keir Starmer in Scotland, Trump vowed to set, quote, food centers up in Gaza. Let's take a listen.
We're going to continue onward. We do have to take care of the humanitarian needs on what they used to call the Gaza Strip. You don't hear that line too much anymore. You don't hear the Gaza Strip, but it is the Gaza Strip, and it's amazing that it's not being handled a little bit differently. We're going to set up food centers, and we're going to do it in conjunction with some very good people, and we're going to supply funds. And we just took in trillions of dollars. We've got a lot of money, and we're going to spend a little money on some food, and other nations are joining us. I know your nation's joining us, and we have all of the European nations joining us, and others also have called, and they want to be helpful. So we're going to set up food centers and where the people can walk in.
Meanwhile, former President Obama wrote in a post on X, quote, While a lasting resolution to the crisis in Gaza must involve a return of all hostages and a cessation of Israel's military operations, these articles underscore the immediate need for action to be taken to prevent the travesty of innocent people dying of preventable starvation. I think that you have to be clear, like Hamas is a terrorist organization. It's not a legitimate government. There's weapons and civilians in the areas of those weapons and issues happening. But at the same time, 2.3 million people cannot be starved in this way. This is not moral. Starving people is not part of any act of war. It is a war crime. And so I think that the condemnation of what's happening is important, and it needs to be as loud as it is. And I'm glad that President Trump is seeing, like, you have to sometimes sidestep Netanyahu, because he is not, like you said, of any leader, end all be all, always correct. And even though Israel does have a right to defend itself from the attack that happened a few years ago in October, it's still time to figure out how these innocent people can stop being so deeply affected in ways that are easily preventable by just allowing the UN and other people to come in.
Yeah, and they have reacted. Israel killed tons of Hamas militants in Gaza, as was their right. But I am seeing these images. I'm reading and following the reporting on what's going on in Gaza, and it is really shocking to the conscience, the level of suffering of children, women, innocent people who, we can say, well, it's Hamas's fault and it's, this and that, but it's what can these people do? They are caught in this awful situation, and they have Israel trying to root out Hamas and killing people, and they're starving, and thousands have died, and thousands more could die imminently because they've just run out of food. It's so hard to even contemplate, and I don't know how anyone can say we can just let this happen, especially because Israel has laid siege to it, controls the whole area around it, and is in the position to dictate what food can get in. On some level, then, you broke it, you bought it. Like, you own the suffering of you have some obligation now to take care of these people that live in such a broken part of land. So I'm glad for what Trump said, and certainly we need to allow for humanitarian efforts to intervene.
And several
people who want to help should be allowed to help.
Have reported that people are going to seek those food areas have been killed. I think more than 1,100 at this point. And I think, the biggest thing is that history is watching. Everyone is going to be judged for how they reacted in this moment, whether they chose courage or whether they chose conformity. Yeah. And I think that's a big deal, and that everyone should be involved in
resolving the political, diplomatic, security issues there is very complicated, but I don't think it's complicated that we can't let thousands of people starve before our very eyes.
Coming up next, Pete Buttigieg giving his 2 cents about the direction of the Democratic Party. I'm going to break down his assessment and my thoughts coming up in my lens. Stick around.
Welcome back to Rising. Lindsay, what is in your lens today?
We're talking about one of your favorite people, Pete Buttigieg.
Oh, okay.
In a recent interview with NPR, Pete Buttigieg shared some powerful thoughts about where the Democratic Party and the country needs to go from here. He made a compelling point. It's not enough to fix what Donald Trump broke. Instead, Buttigieg argues Democrats have to go further. They need to reimagine the entire system so that it actually works for the American people. It's a wake-up call. For years, Buttigieg has pushed the idea that government needs more than a fresh coat of paint. It needs a full renovation. In his conversation on Morning Edition, Buttigieg highlighted a few critical points. Take a look.
Democrats have failed to do so up to now. Do you agree with that?
I would mostly agree. Yeah. I think that Democrats have been slow to understand the changes in how people get their information, slow to understand some of the cultural changes that have been happening, and maybe most problematic of all, too attached to a status quo that has been failing us for a long time.
And that's really the crux of it. I mean, there's a gap between the way the party sees the world and how everyday Americans are experiencing it. Buttigieg is saying out loud what many have been whispering. The old ways of doing things just are not cutting it anymore. He went on to say this.
Right now, you've got an administration that is burning down so many of the most important institutions that we have in this country, which is wrong. It is also wrong to imagine that we should have just kept everything going along the way it was. If our politics, our economy, and our culture were healthy, the rise of a figure like Donald Trump would never have happened in the first place.
Now, what I like is that he's not just criticizing Trump. He's challenging Democrats, too. Buttigieg is pointing to something much deeper, that the system itself hasn't been working for a long time, and pretending we can go back to quote-unquote normal isn't going to cut it. Instead of just repairing departments like the Education Department or USAID, he's pushing for transformation. He wants these institutions to be more modern, more accountable, and more connected to the real needs of today's America. But it's not just about the structure, it's about trust. Buttigieg is warning that public faith in government has eroded, and that's opened the door for conspiracy theories and misinformation and really extreme politics. If Democrats want to win people back, they have to stop avoiding the hard questions and start making some bold, meaningful changes. In the end, Buttigieg's message is really simple but urgent. The Democratic Party has to evolve. That means letting go of what no longer works and being brave enough to build something new. It's about tuning into how people live now, how they get their news, who they trust, what they need, and designing a government that reflects that. Looking ahead to 2028 and beyond, this could be a real blueprint for Democrats. Buttigieg isn't asking them to look back. He's challenging them to look forward with open eyes, open ears, and the courage to just listen to the people they're supposed to represent.
Secretary Mayor Pete, as I like to call him.
Yes, and obviously he has a stake in this. Let's just get that out of the way. He's going to run for president.
Yes.
That's pretty obvious, and he's trying to be balanced. I think he's going more with a Bill Clinton approach that I'm like, the more moving over to the center. I can see the criticism.
Well, he's pretty centrist. My read on him is that people on the left did not like him at all when he ran in 2020. I mean, I know that for a fact. I have co-hosted this show with a number of left people. We've had on left guests.
His profile was much lower, though,
They really did not like him. And then he served as transportation secretary. And I guess his tenure as transportation secretary was a little bit more progressive, maybe than they expected for a variety of reasons. I'm not quite sure why, but this is my read on how the left has reacted to him. So I think he's in better standing with multiple factions of the Democratic Party at present, which is going to be useful as he moves forward. I will say, to his credit, I obviously don't agree with his policies. I don't have anything specifically against him. He speaks well when he goes on TV, and he is not afraid to go on Fox and to go into not totally friendly media environments and make his pitch. He's correct, as he said in that interview, the Democrats, unlike him, other Democrats have been slow to adapt to the new communications mediums, platforms where people want to get news and information, and he is not like that. He is ahead of the curve on doing conservative media, unfriendly media, and then also long-form podcasts, and coming across like a normal enough person, not a kind of like consultant orchestrated by committee Kamala Harris type of person, for lack of a better example of the kind of Democrat who's not really succeeding in an alternate media environment. So he has all that going for him. The
polls have been all over the place, though. Like right after the election, and I think this is kind of obvious and always would happen. If somebody just lost an election like Kamala did, then she keeps polling as the obvious front runner to run again in 2028. But now there's been recent polls where Buttigieg is actually out-polling her. And so that shows
out-polling who?
Kamala, like when they say who would win.
Surprising.
Well, she for the longest she was like, last few months. That's just natural, right? But I think, like, as we talk about emerging leaders and where the party's going, there still is a disconnect about where it's going, because we can't have, I think, such wide-ranging candidates on the table for the Democratic Party that it's kind of all over the place. Like, if you have a Buttigieg, and then you have somebody who emphasizes some of the things that Mamdani does, and then you have a Kamala, or you have AOC and Bernie Sanders kind of doing their own thing.
What's wrong with that? We're going to do that, and then we're going to find out which way it's going based on how people vote.
But I think that should happen now. That should happen. That more people should speak up right now about their intentions, and you'll start to get a read on where Americans stand, rather than having the party in a few years look like it's in disarray, because that's been the biggest critique. Why are you still in disarray? Trump is almost like teeing up an alley-oop for you to have a basket, because he's doing such a ridiculous job in fulfilling some of the commitments that he made. The economy is still not great, the number one commitment that he made. And so, therefore, it's an opportunity to do things. But Buttigieg's point is, like, nobody wants to hear anyone continuously complain about Trump, in the same way I don't want to hear Trump continuously complain about Biden. It's old news at this point. What are you going to do differently? And so I think that is the thing that they need to organize and figure out the party messaging. And then there could be different ways to get to the same goal, but the end goals have to be the same. The end goals can't be all over the place. Like, my number one thing is going to be climate change for the Democratic Party. My number one thing is going to be bringing back, reconnecting to some of these fringe issues. Like, the Democratic Party has to figure out what its overall message is, and then everyone can figure out different ways to get there. I think that would be a great starting point.
Well, look, for 2028, you're going to have a couple different lanes. I think there's going to be like 5 people, basically, in contention for serious nomination potential.
You know them? You think you know them already?
Yes. My predictions are it's going to be Kamala Harris, Gavin Newsom, AOC, or some other left person. There's going to be room for one left person. It's probably AOC. Could be someone else, but probably AOC. Then you're Buttigieg, and then like Josh Shapiro or Gretchen Whitmer or something. Josh Shapiro is, I think, the most appealing of because he's the governor of the must-win state. They overlooked that last time when they were picking the vice president.
Yes.
But Newsom's clearly going for it because he's doing the whole podcast thing. Kamala Harris, it defies my brain that she could possibly want to do this again, but by all
given the amount of time,
she does.
there's a valid argument that given more than 107 days to be specific, that she could have had a better campaign, right?
Yeah,
anyone could have.
I can see why she thinks that.
Anyone would have.
Obvious.
That was abrupt, and
the problem
also
for her, she didn't get to pick her own people. She didn't get to pick her own team. She didn't get to put her team together to help elect her president. She had to use Biden's team, and Biden's team didn't like her.
But do you see what like J.D. Vance is doing? He's going out and rallying for the big beautiful bill. He's looking very vice presidential in moments where you usually would see President Trump doing this. He's kind of taking a foreground.
He's the designated
and so there would
successor.
have been an option for Kamala to stand out in a way that we see Vance doing right now. I think she might have been more successful. We'll keep talking about this, though. Next up, Ghislaine Maxwell is making a final plea to the Supreme Court to overturn her conviction. Stay with us.
Former Jeffrey Epstein associate Ghislaine Maxwell is asking the Supreme Court to overturn her sex trafficking conviction.
Maxwell's lawyer is also seeking the help of President Trump, who has said that he's allowed to pardon Maxwell, but that hasn't really thought about it.
Maxwell's attorney said in a statement, "We are appealing to not only the Supreme Court, but to the president himself to recognize how profoundly unjust it is to scapegoat Ghislaine Maxwell for Epstein's crimes, especially when the government promised that she would not be prosecuted." The Supreme Court may consider hearing Maxwell's case when they return from summer recess. Maxwell's argument is that her conviction violates a non-prosecution deal that Epstein made when he avoided federal charges and pled guilty to lesser charges of sex crimes in 2007.
Now, lower courts have ruled, however, that the deal only covers that specific Florida district, and Maxwell was convicted in New York. Meanwhile, President Trump spoke yesterday about why he's cut his ties with Epstein. Let's take a look.
But I don't want to waste your time by explaining it. But for years, I wouldn't talk to Jeffrey Epstein. I wouldn't talk because he did something that was inappropriate. He hired help. And I said, don't ever do that again. He stole people that worked for me. I said, don't ever do that again. He did it again. And I threw him out of the place, persona non grata. I threw him out, and that was it. I'm glad I did, if you want to know the truth.
Another major shape. Oh, that's getting into the next.
Yeah,
segment.
stay here with me for a second because we're talking Epstein. I know you're trying to run away from it. I know you're trying to run away from Epstein. Stay in the segment, Robbie. You have to talk about this. I wanted to say to everybody, I actually want to look at the camera. Everybody in the MAGA base that apparently is starting to not care about this, that is absolutely ridiculous. You done brought us involved in this. You got us involved about how outrageous this is, and now you're just going to say, never mind? There's so much here. I also think if you take it seriously for a second, she meets with the DOJ. This is Ghislaine Maxwell and her team. And now all of a sudden, days later, she's asking for all these pardons publicly. And this is somebody who is, completely egregious person, has committed some heinous acts that everybody can agree, no matter what part of the aisle you're on, should not be out of prison because she complied with President Trump in some way or is trying to, what the strategy is here looks pretty simple. Get Ghislaine Maxwell to agree that, yes, pin this on anybody who's Democratic or anybody who's outspoken in a liberal way. Say President Trump didn't do anything. Next thing, she's pardoned for being like a hero and a martyr speaking up. And then she gets like a caveat to get her out of this big trial. Out of this big conviction. And the bottom line is this is elite privilege. This is the exact thing that the MAGA base argued about. This is the bureaucracy that everybody young hates so much. So why would we allow Ghislaine Maxwell some weird courtesy because she's providing names of everyone besides President Trump?
You're going to hate that I say this, but it's just how I feel. And I can't help but feel this way. Even for people who are totally reprehensible, as I'm sure I have very little doubt Ghislaine Maxwell is a reprehensible person who was involved in the appalling crimes, sexual abuse of Jeffrey Epstein. I still don't love, maybe this is my libertarianism, I don't know, when the government uses some technicality. If they made a non-prosecution agreement with her, maybe they shouldn't have done that. Maybe they should have prosecuted to the maximum and not taken the easy way out, not settled and not given sweetheart deals, and maybe they should have done the real work of actually convicting and putting someone away for the more serious crimes. If they gave her a non-prosecution agreement and now they're trying to say, oh, it was only for that district, ha-ha, we tricked you. That does kind of make me go, man, the system's, it's rigged. I don't know. What do you want me to say? That's how I feel about, even for reprehensible people, if they trick you, I mean, the deep state criminal justice system, they can do that to bad people. They can do that to good people, too, if they're allowed to get away with it.
This is why Americans don't trust our...
This is why they don't trust the system, is because
this is exactly
you work
what we
with
both
the system
agree upon,
and then
right? This is exactly the thing. It's like, so the fact that you would find some legal small gray area to say this is the reason why someone who did or was complicit in all these egregious acts...
They found a gray area to put her in prison in the first place because they had agreed not to prosecute her earlier. Is the argument she's going to make to the Supreme Court.
No, I think she had a great lawyer who is looking at the case now and knowing that she has the eyes of the world and the ear of President Trump, and trying to find any way, and also a Supreme Court that favors President Trump.
This is not about a pardon, though. This is about
a Supreme Court that favors President Trump. And so even if it does. And so even though, it's a time where we would think, sure, if there's really a legality that has been oversight and illegality, then let her off. But if there's not, and somebody's just going to do a favor for President Trump because this makes him look good in some way, this is all the problem with government and why so many people are scrutinizing it. And I would hate to see that happen, especially for all the victims that are still alive out there and have been suffering through this call for evidence, through this information request. And now the only woman, because they cannot bring Epstein to justice, the only woman that has been brought to justice will now walk free because of a technicality.
The idea, I don't know that that's going to happen, because the Supreme Court could not look at this, or they could look at this and say, technically the non-prosecution agreement did not apply to the district you were prosecuted in, so tough luck, it sticks. You say the Supreme Court is pro-Trump. It is true that most of the Supreme Court was appointed by Trump and that they have conservative views and that they sometimes rule in Trump's favor. They sometimes rule against Trump as well. The idea that they're like all bought and paid for by Trump and they're just totally beholden to him is totally at odds with reality. It's actually not even how Trump people feel about the Supreme Court. Trump people feel betrayed constantly by Amy Coney Barrett and Brett Kavanaugh in particular, and John Roberts wasn't appointed by Trump, but he's a Republican. You don't get universal pro-Trump rulings. You've gotten pro-Trump rulings in a couple cases. They're definitely ideologically conservative leaning, but that doesn't mean personally. They don't face, unlike elected representatives in Congress who have to be pro-Trump in order to keep the MAGA base happy, the Supreme Court faces no democratic accountability whatsoever. I don't know what that says about democracy, that it makes them more independent and more interesting in their judgments, and in some ways is in my view, the strongest branch of government at this point, or the one that's functioning the most in keeping with our founders' beliefs, and is a deliberative body where sometimes Republicans win and sometimes they don't win, and is actually doing the legislative function, is the one that's least democratically accountable. Is very interesting, but I don't think that it's not like, Trump really wants her to get off for some reason, so we got to find a way to get her off. That's not how they operate. It's not.
Well, it's supposed to be apolitical, fine, but that doesn't, in recent history, even by the leaking of Roe v. Wade coming out from a Supreme Court, that's not very apolitical.
We don't know who leaked that.
We don't know. Right. Exactly. My point is that it's gotten more politicized over the last even 5 years, we can say. And so I think that makes the American public have their eyebrows raised. Mm-hmm. And even though, yes, President Trump appointed more conservative views, the overarching point is that there is an obvious something here that is worth being looked at. So when the Department of Justice goes to visit Ghislaine Maxwell, who had no incentive on speaking and hasn't spoken really publicly, or her lawyer hasn't said anything for a while, and now all of a sudden they're so confident, speaking out with such authority. We're going to not only President Trump, but the Supreme Court and finding things. They feel like they have an incentive to speak, right? Her lawyer is not a silly man. He's a very smart and successful lawyer. So he's going forward saying, there might be an opening here for me to get my client out of jail, as any lawyer would, but also maybe because that conversation that we got no details about with the Department of Justice going to visit her was somehow, there was an inclination that if you do talk to me, then there will be some incentive to make your life a little bit better for you, right? Because otherwise, why would I speak to you? What would be Ghislaine Maxwell's point in speaking to the Department of Justice?
If she knows something that we don't know, let's hear it. I mean, I would like to know. We shouldn't trust it automatically. She's self-serving and she's trying to get out of jail.
And she's perjured multiple times, yeah, so we shouldn't trust it at all. So that's what I'm saying. This doesn't benefit the same people that were requesting the information. The only information that would benefit Americans is if the president releases all the information that his Treasury Department, everyone has.
Due process and
she got it and she's convicted.
Right. What she's saying the argument they're making is that it violated the deal. That could be totally incorrect. It could be technically incorrect.
And the other argument she's making is, pardon me, because it's quid pro quo at this point, right? Yeah. Because you're former personal lawyer,
that's not a component of due process, right? That's just begging for a pardon. Yeah, I don't want her to get a pardon.
Do you feel strongly about the pardon? You feel like if there's a legality, then she needs to be off because that's the law. But if she asks Trump for a pardon, will the MAGA base be revolted if she gets pardoned?
Yes, absolutely. Unless if she's just pardoned willy-nilly, if she's pardoned in exchange for explaining that Jeffrey Epstein and providing evidence that he was working for the U.S. intelligence or Israeli intelligence, no, I think that would be well worth it. Now, if we already have that evidence, it's not necessary to get Ghislaine Maxwell out of prison to provide it, and the government should just release it. Or maybe it's just not the case that he's an asset of any kind and she's just would be making that up to get out of prison. So I'm saying we should proceed very carefully. I don't want to get her out of prison. Obviously, she's complicit in appalling sex crimes. I want her behind bars just as I wanted Jeffrey Epstein behind bars, and he took or somehow got the easy way out. And that's very bad. And the MAGA base should remain laser focused on getting accountability for the victims and getting real information from the administration that they have been promised, we have been promised for years and years and years.
And they should not give up the fight, MAGA base. You heard it from Robby.
Next up, now we can get to it. Another major shakeup at the Washington Post top ranks. We'll tell you more. Stay with us. More shakeups are going on at the Washington Post top brass. Veteran lead fact checker Glenn Kessler announced Monday he took the buyout. Kessler's 2-decade career at the Post, 15 of which were fact-checking, marked by the famous Pinocchio truth meter. That's all over. In a lengthy post on LinkedIn, he wrote in part, quote, "Much as I would have liked to keep scrutinizing politicians in Washington, especially in this era, the financial considerations were impossible to dismiss. I had my detractors from both the left and the right, but many readers appreciated my efforts to sort out the truth in political rhetoric."
Now, Kessler's exit follows an email to WAPO CEO Will Lewis. Well, he sent it out earlier this year, all but pushing journals out. He encouraged those who do not, quote, who do not feel aligned, end quote, with the company's new directives to consider the buyout. Now, it remains unclear if the outlet will replace the Pinocchio doll in Kessler or fact check at all. The outlet has seen an overhaul recently, with owner Jeff Bezos himself revamping the opinion section, saying it will focus on 2 pillars: personal liberties and free markets.
Those are my pillars. I love those
okay,
pillars.
Well, you might have a new job soon.
Mm-hmm.
Listen, disinformation it needs to be checked. And so I think the fact that it's going unchecked and there's no replacement, yes, it does. No. It only deepens the divide in journalism. I think, when a watchdog steps down, like Kessler, who's been doing this for 15 years, right? He has over 3,000 fact checks, and he fact checks Trump, which is why I said Trump's affecting the media too much, more than 30,000 plus false or misleading claims. You hear how crazy that sounds? Trump made 30,000 false or misleading claims that he fact-checked. And now that the Washington Post
so crazy,
is
I
owned
don't even believe it's scientific.
No, by Jeff Bezos, now it's like, okay, we have to move more to the right. We have to appease President Trump.
What do you mean now that it's owned by Jeff Bezos? It's been owned by Jeff Bezos for years.
Well, now that
and
President
years.
Trump is president, let me rephrase that, right? Now that he's in a position of power, everyone's stance is changing. Like, oh, let's just bring the pendulum all the way over here. Forget the fact-checking. Like, I think that is not okay, right? In journalism, we need real information, especially when it's coming from politicians. It can't just be all biased. Just like we ask people on podcasts to ask tough questions and get to the bottom of stuff, and we ask for journalists to write about, and you ask for conservative critics to challenge the other side. We also need the honest truth. And so if there's a fact checker telling you, hey, at this debate, Biden lied 15 times, that is a fair assessment. We need to know that.
I'm going to do my little fact check
of
your comments just now. Jeff Bezos did not say we're going to abandon fact-checking. That was not the directive to Will Lewis. What he said is that he wants the editorial content of the opinion section to reflect Bezos' own values, which are not necessarily Trump's values, which are for personal liberties and for free markets. Those actually do happen to be my values. It's a libertarian outlook. It's Jeff Bezos' outlook. He wants to be in support of markets and civil liberties, and that's what he wants the editorial voice of the opinion page to be. It doesn't mean they're not going to platform other ideas, but that's from the editorial voice of the opinion page. And he said that anyone who is uncomfortable with that new direction should take some kind of buyout and leave the paper. Glenn Kessler is one of those people who, given that is the ideological drive of the paper, no longer wants to be associated with it, and that is fine. I will say that Glenn Kessler has done some work over the years that I think is very good. I've been cited by him in the past, so have other people at Reason. He's also done some work, I think, that did not stand up very well, including on the Hunter Biden laptop story. His view of that, it's like there's so many, like, corrected this day, added this day, where all these things he said about how Biden was not drawn into Hunter Biden's association. Well, actually, Joe Biden was at that dinner. Actually, Hunter Biden did try to get him on the phone with whatever associate. Those kinds of things. That's fine. Journalists get new information and update what they say. But my point is that by pretending that he was a referee above the fray, he's not a journalist. He doesn't have opinions. He's the fact checker. He's objective. That model is bad and dead and done and going away. We're all fact checkers. We're all writers. We're all editorializers.
No, some people
we're all
are just writing their pure opinion. Also, he
that's
offered to stay.
That's what fact checkers are doing. They're writing their pure opinion.
No, he offered to stay and help find a successor that maybe was more neutral, in your words, or somebody who was literally like an AI.
I don't want neutral.
Okay, an AI
honest.
machine. But the Washington Post failed to make that work, and so obviously he left saying it wasn't going to work, and so that's the point.
Good.
So I just think like there should be somebody in that role. That was a
I don't want
role.
neutral. I just want honest. Tell me what you think and what your bias is, and then I'll decide whether the information you're giving me I think is correct. Don't say, I have no views, I'm totally objective and neutral, I'm just a fact checker. Here is the truth. That's what I don't want, because you're lying. You have your own biases and views.
Yeah, but you can actually read the truth and find out the truth. So
right, I will decide that for myself. I am the ultimate fact checker for me, Robby Soave.
Well, that does it for us on Rising. Look out for more exclusive YouTube content coming your way today. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe to The Hill's YouTube channel so you never miss any content from us. And for those of you who like to listen on the go, we're available anywhere you listen to podcasts. See you next time.